Welcome back to Track Talk. This is a video in our ongoing series on the 1830 tournament. This will be Game N, featuring Chuck Hanna, Raku Saltimus, Physics Squirrel, and Arison. Physics Squirrel was, I believe, one of the top four finishers last year, so probably a favorite for a good finish in this game as well. We will jump into the auction here, starting with Chuck. He's going to bid on the Camden and Amboy. Rock is joining on the Camden and Amboy, so a lot of excitement about that private early on. Champlain and St. Lawrence gets an early bid from Physics Squirrel. We saw this work out not so great for some of the players last game, where early cheap bids led to an early pull. We'll see if it's any different this game. Arison is going to round us out on Delaware and Hudson. Chuck Hanna goes for the M&H, and Physics Squirrel, or sorry, Rock is going to go for the D&H. Physics Squirrel's second bid is the M&H. So really a pretty well-distributed private auction thus far. Arison joins on the Champlain and St. Lawrence. Chuck is going to pass, doesn't want to pull, and Rock will bite the bullet and buy the Schuylkill. So that leaves Arison and Physics Squirrel on the Champlain and St. Lawrence. Physics Squirrel is also on the M&H, and Arison is also on the D&H. So they both have kind of intermediate valued privates following this, and we'll see if either one of them wants to really commit their cash and risk losing out on one of the better privates. Physics Squirrel going up to 55. That was okay, yeah. So he just overbids by 5. I thought it was a bigger jump than that. And Arison 60, pretty expensive already for the Champlain St. Lawrence, and he takes it for 60. Makes it a little bit hard and a little bit less likely that he will grab the D and H. That said, Rock is also on the Camden and Amboy, so probably we'll see Arison take this. I don't imagine Rock wants to win this and then be unable to price and force the Camden and Amboy. We'll see. Arison up to 85, and it goes to Arison for just 95. So pretty good price there. And he is now finished with the auction. Probably pretty happy with the way that worked out. Now we're on to Physics Squirrel and Chuck. Chuck doesn't have a private yet, neither does Physics Squirrel actually. But Chuck is also on the Camden and Amboy, so probably see Physics Squirrel walk away with the M&H here. He's going up to 150, reasonable. And now we're to the big private, Camden and Amboy, Rock and Chuck. And this is going to determine who ends up with the B&O, because Rock, although he has a private, only has $5 in income. So really, Chuck needs to make sure that he doesn't let Rock have this for too cheap, because if Chuck has to buy the B&O, Rock will have priority and the PRR, and the Camden and Amboy. Looks like they're going to go up to 220, 30, and Rock takes it for 230. That will leave him enough to float the PRR if he wants it. So Chuck maybe could have pressed that a little bit higher, but decides not to. Chuck takes the B&O as expected, pars it at 100, and Rock is first up in the stock round and will immediately snap up that PRR. Physics Squirrel is going to follow on the C&O. Arison takes the M1H. So the three commonly floated companies are now parred, and Chuck is going to, looks like, just sit on his cash for now, maybe take the B&O in the next stock round. Looks like everyone was just on auto purchase, so it was a really quick stock round. All three companies floated, and Chuck ends up with priority. PRR is first to operate and is going to lay towards the east. Buys two trains. Not sure what the rationale is there. In order to run both those trains, we'll need to lay Lancaster and Pittsburgh. So that's going to be at least another 2 operating rounds. Very likely we'll see 4s before that. C&O heading towards Chicago, buys a single 2 train. NYNH towards New York, the New York home, so Albany. And also buying 2 trains, buying into the 3s. So we'll be the first private buy in OR1. Arison has a bunch of cash into the stock round as a result, but he's not going to have enough cash to float without heavily selling out of the NYNH. The NYNH has a pretty poor treasury at this point, so not unreasonable to sell it out, but there is a cost in the sense that you still have the liability for the train, and you run the risk of someone taking that company away from you and losing your synergy for the NYC if that's what you decide to pick. Chuck Hanna is actually going to steal the NYC from him, so deny him that opportunity. And this means that somebody else can take the B&O. B&O is probably going to be cut off at Lancaster. Um, there are 3 trains available, so if the B&O floats from Arison, the B&O will be able to get into Lancaster still. But if nobody takes it here in this stock round, it's going to be probably tokened out at Lancaster. Something to keep our eye on. Rock is selling a PRR and will take an NYC. Not sure why he wants that. Company won't run in the first operating round of this set, so its revenue is going to be a little bit low. Maybe he's trying to trash already, but it's just letting Chuck invest his cash elsewhere. For instance, he can just buy a paying PRR share instead of a non-paying NYC share with this. So a little bit confused by that. Physics Squirrel, going to snap up that PRR share, and he sells it. Okay, so maybe hoping that there's a train rush and the PRR falls back trainless. Not sure. Arison is going to sell out of the NYNH. He sells out of it pretty heavily. Didn't need to sell that many shares in order to float a company or to take over the B&O. So I'm assuming that he's hoping nobody takes this over. He can withhold to rebuild its treasury with a minimal presidency and then buy back cheap shares. I'm sure that's the plan. We'll see if that actually works out for him or not. Buying the B&O, so pressuring that presidency. Chuck can't have both the NYC and the B&O, so he's going to commit to the NYC. Rock is selling the share he bought. Doesn't even change the stock value. I'm a little bit confused what the strategy there is. And buys a B&O, so also helping that company float as well. Physics Squirrel is going to sit on cash. Arison still taking the B&O presidency. Doesn't look like Chuck is going to try and defend. He really probably can't, so reasonable. Rock sitting on his shares. Physics Squirrel. Arison has now floated the B&O. Actually floats before the NYC as a result of the help from Rock. Chuck is now floated as well. And Arison has a bunch of cash left to invest since he really has a very minimal B&O presidency. Looks like the NYC shares are being bought. And now Arison's going back for paying C&O shares. Okay. Chuck has sold the B&O. Reasonable. Probably don't want to hold on to those shares and risk it being dumped back on you with bad track and no permanent trains. Unlikely that would happen, but if Arison holds on to the NYNH, could easily see him shuffle cash into the NYNH and then try and dump the B&O. So reasonable to worry about that. Chuck is, on the other hand, buying NYH shares. We'll see if he actually tries to take the presidency or if he just wants to buy a cheap share. Rock also selling out of the B&O. So a lot of trashing going on early in this game. Okay, I mean, it's multiple players doing it, so we'll see what effect that has as we progress. Also going back for a cheap NYNH. Physics Squirrel content. Arison is going to buy the now trashed B&Os. Chuck passing, sitting at $168. And we will pass into the operating round. So Chuck, a little bit of inefficiency here, sitting on a lot of cash. Could probably have the share lead if he hadn't, if he had bought shares. Regardless, we're into operating round 2. Arison is up on the B&O and is going to head right towards the Lancaster. As noted, when it floated in stock round 2, because we have green track in advance, it's guaranteed to get into Lancaster. But that is bad news both for the B&O and the PRR in the sense that they will lock themselves out of Reading and Allentown until Brown if the B&O gets in there. There's just no valid upgrade that will allow both of them in there and also access to Reading and Allentown. Buys the 3 train, buys 2 3 trains, and the NYC is up. Land its home, buys a 3, and this leads us to wonder, I mean, is there going to be a fallback on the PRR because it's been trashed enough? There's only 1 3 train left. It would be pretty expensive for the C&O to bring out the 3 and the 4, and it would mean that they probably can't buy in their private. I guess if they double withhold and then buy those trains, they probably can still do it. I would have to sit down and do the math of that to be sure, but it's feasible. We'll see if Physics Squirrel wants to play hardball here. Links up with Chicago, runs for 70, pays it, so not withholding. Don't think we'll see both trains bought here. He doesn't. PRR gets to run one of his trains, but I imagine we're still going to see the trains rust before he can run both of them. He is going to buy in his private, so also doesn't have enough cash to buy the 4. And he buys it in a point 0.1 operating round instead of the point 0.2, so he's going to lose out on $30 of money for his presidency. NYNH, 4 trains, but would have to token in Albany to run 2 of them. So we'll see that. Pretty decent revenue of 90 and paying it out. Might want to have withhold there. He did sell out quite heavily, so he's only getting 20% of that revenue. And he has a bunch of parasite investors. All right. I think if you're going to sell out this much, you probably want to be withholding to stay yellow and deny your parasites revenue. B&O, as expected, gets into Lancaster. Tokens it immediately to run both of his trains and is going to pay for 100. Does buy the 4, so it came out too late to hurt the PRR, but it does come out before anybody's able to run their 2s for a second time. CNO is laying the number 2 track. Going to deny that to the NYNH and NYC. Runs for 80, pays it, and is going to buy his private. Okay. NYC upgrades New York, has to pay 80 bucks for that, but still has a very healthy treasury and is going to run a single train. Does buy a 4, so we'll be able to run double runs into New York next operating round. But by upgrading New York here, doing the NYNH a pretty big favor. They wouldn't have been able to pay to upgrade it. And you're going to see some of these trains shuffled out of the B&O, I'm sure. NYNH gets the double run into Albany. And are we going to see them shuffle trains? Yes. And does withhold there. I think probably should have withheld both times, but we see it at least once. So this is keeping the company unattractive for people to take the presidency, and Arison's probably going to look towards buying both of these cheap shares, if I had to guess. He has left himself in a situation where he's potentially going to be train locked when these 5s come out in both companies, which is a little bit nerve-wracking, especially when you're sitting on 3 trains and very little cash. PRR trainless. I think we missed how this came about. Did he neglect to buy a 3 train at all? He must have. So when that 4 train came out, he did fall back. All right. Philadelphia gets upgraded, doesn't block himself at least, and has to out of pocket a 4 train. Off to a rough start. That makes that CNA buy-in a lot less attractive when you have to immediately turn around and give 130 of it back to your company. We're into stock round 3. Chuck Hannah's up, and we'll buy a B&O share from the market. Rock is buying the NYC. So it looks like players are kind of prioritizing things correctly. They're buying the companies with 2 trains. I'm going to have the highest revenue and just look to live off that revenue and then flip companies in the next stock round potentially. Physics Squirrel also buying the B&O. Arison also actually, yeah, Arison also buying B&O. So 3 players bought that. Chuck Hannah is buying the CNO. Rock, looks like everybody's just following suit, buying cheap paying shares. And nobody is going for that NYNH. That is the kind of value play here, I'd say. I guess in order to make it worthwhile, you'd have to steal the presidency, so there is some risk associated with that. And the reason I say that is because if you buy just 1 share, you leave yourself open to a dump. You also don't take control of the company, so Arison could just withhold and make your investment worthless and then dump it on you in the future. So you'd have to buy both of these shares to make it worthwhile, probably. CNO is sold out and then trashed. Okay. So CNO's ledged, doesn't really change operating order. And Rock has to find somewhere to put his cash. We'll see what he wants to do. A lot of trashing's been going on early in this game. Physics Squirrel buying the NYC. That company's now sold out. Arison still passing. Chuck passing. Rock going for the B&O. He's buying it from the IPO, so pretty big cash hit there. It only is a hit if you sell, of course, but it is losing some liquidity by buying those shares from the IPO. Physics Squirrel picking up the cheap NYNH. Not worried about a dump since he just has the one share so far. And Rock is still buying shares here. Physics Squirrel now has bought up 20%. We'll see if he wants to buy that $67 share or if Arison just dumps the company. So Arison's just going to dump it. I wonder why he did that. Could have forced Physics Squirrel to invest further, which makes the dump a little bit more painful. Now he's just giving Physics Squirrel cheap shares. I think the better move would be make the other player or force the other player to, buy the more expensive shares and make it hard for them to buy the cheap shares because they've already spent their cash. I'm not sure. Everybody's passing. Physics Squirrel buys the cheap share, not worried about it. This will give Arison priority probably, and he does get it. Okay. So yeah, a little bit of an interesting decision to dump there. I don't know. I mean, you probably don't want to run a split presidency, but I think you should let the other player fully commit before you dump. All right. B&O, Lang Washington. This does give him a better run for his 2 trains, but it is further depleting his treasury. Running for 190, pays it out. C&O, heading over to the east, already tokened out at Lancaster, so those 2 companies are not too worried about this progress he's making. Pays out 80. Physics Squirrel is in a position where he's got 3 trains and really no company money. So anticipating we're going to see some withholding, but he has 80% of the revenue of this company, so it makes sense to pay here and withhold on the NYNH. We'll see if he shuffles a train out of the NYNH. Probably not. The three runs here are much more efficient than they would be with the C&O. Doesn't look like he's shuffling for now. NYC heading over to Rochester and is paying for 190. PRR links up with the C&O track and is going to pay for 100. NYNH, are we going to see some withholds here? Has great 3 runs for 210 and does withhold. Okay. B&O upgrading his home and is going to pay for 220. NYC heading over to the Erie home. Is Chuck first in priority? No, but second in priority, and Arison probably won't have liquidity to float. So maybe Chuck thinks he's going to pick up a Erie to complement the NYC. We'll see. Pays for 210. C&O upgrading Pittsburgh and B&O. I neglected to notice token in Pittsburgh. So C&O now probably wants to token that Pittsburgh too. Does. This makes the PRR's runs a little bit less attractive. It's going to be depending on if they get the Philadelphia run or not. Pays out for 80. PRR gets into Baltimore again, but actually doesn't look like they're running that track at all. Is that actually the case? I don't know if this is accurate. There's got to be a better run, right? This is only $40. This is 50. Yeah. All right. So B&O's happy about that, getting multiple runs into Baltimore, and the opponent's not even running that track. NYNH looking to bypass Rochester, it looks like, or at least setting up for it. Runs for 210 and withholds again. So, Physics Squirrel at the beginning of this set of operating rounds was a little bit tenuous, had 2 companies with very little money, and with some smart withholds has plenty of money for permanent trains now, and still a lot of money going into the stock round. So he's in pretty good shape. Stock round 4. Just looking at the game state here, Physics Squirrel and Chuck Hanna are neck and neck in terms of net worth. Share lead is clearly in Physics Squirrel's favor. The other 2 players are trailing. In terms of map presence, the NYC is in a good position, has all of their tokens, doesn't have a lot of cash, so I'd say that Chuck's map position is pretty good. Physics Squirrel map position is also, I guess, at least as good, right? The NYNH can run all the track that the NYC can right now, and then the C&O is an added benefit. Rock with the PRR, some limitations because of the tokens in Pittsburgh on the PRR, but We'll see if he's able to overcome that with developing track to the east. And then Arison, B&O's track is great, has good runs for the short term, but needs to find permanent train money. Stock round 4, Arison is going to trash the B&O. That's an attractive company for a takeover. So he's already lost the NYNH. We'll see if he also loses the B&O. Selling further out and will float the Erie. Okay. Erie, as noted during the operating round, has had track laid for it, but I don't know. You're playing with a shark here. Physics Squirrel has already taken one of your trust companies, and that was a lot less attractive than this B&O company is. B&O has good track developed and a much fuller treasury than the NYNH did. So I don't know if this is a safe play. Chuckana is also selling out of the B&O. Nobody wants this company and is going to heavily sell out to float the B&M. What's the B&M track situation? I imagine it's bad. So heavily dependent on this upgrade being available for him to have life in this game on the B&M. It looks like everybody's in a rush to float companies, but do they really need to be? I think they could just buy paying shares. Rock is buying the PRR that's been sold. Physics Squirrel is selling out of the NYC, okay, and the CNO, and buying cheap shares. All right, so his share lead may continue to expand, although selling all these shares has set him back equal with Rock. But he does have substantial liquidity, so should be able to get his share lead back up there. Arison, we'll see if he takes any detours on the way of floating the Erie. Not just yet. Chuck, also floating the B&M. Rock, buying his PRR. He's got up to 80% of that, and now should be looking towards depleting the other players' markets and living off their revenue. He's going to have to, I don't fault him for buying the PRR shares. He's going to have to withhold on this company, though. So he needs to get other players to start paying his bills for him. Physics Squirrel, buying the B&O. So as I kind of thought, could very well see him steal this B&O presidency. $200 a 4-train, great track. Yeah, I think that's a sure steal. Arison continuing to float. B&M floating as well. Rock still buying the PRR. I would much prefer to see him buying other players' shares. This is a $27 hit to his net worth. Not that that's the end of the world, but you don't have to pay it right now. And this is a company that you're going to be withholding on. Much rather buy shares so that Physics Squirrel can't buy them. You want to deny cheap shares to your opponents. Physics Squirrel does take the presidency of the B&O. At least this time, Arison makes him actually buy the shares before he sells. I do anticipate Arison probably selling at least one share, though. Doesn't want to be left vulnerable to the dump since Physics Squirrel is directly ahead of him in priority. It's always vulnerable or a tenuous situation for Arison. So he does sell a B&O, okay, and will buy an NYC instead. Chuck, going to buy the B&M still. Rock, he's dead set on this PRR. I mean, it is cool to have 100% of a company. I 100% agree with that. But he's now floating himself up. So, that's counterproductive when you're trying to stay brown and orange. And also, he's buying shares that, again, probably are not going to pay. So, I don't. And a third downside, as noted, is that he's buying shares that Physics Squirrel was not going to buy. You want to buy the shares that the person going for a share density lead is trying to hoover up so that you can contest that. Physics Squirrel is passing on $400 something. Plenty of shares available for him to buy. He may just not be interested in depleting his own market since he knows that he's going to get that money into the company either way. I will note that, compare the play of Rock to Physics Squirrel. Rock has bought all of his market shares, is floating himself up. Physics Squirrel happy to sit on a low percentage presidency, let those IPO shares just sit there, and you can buy them later in the game when you have cash to burn. Arison, what is Arison doing? He's passing. So what's going on? Some of these players are playing a game of chicken here. I guess Arison is waiting for the B&M to float and then is going to trash it. Yeah. I think that's probably what we'll see. Rock buys a CNO. Physics Squirrel sitting on liquidity. I think we're going to see some late in the stock round trashing. Looks like Arison's bought 1 share. Physics Squirrel still passing. Arison now up to 2 shares and sells it immediately. Erie was already operating ahead of B&M, so that doesn't change operating order there. It also doesn't change operating order in terms of these other companies. Looking at the train roster, we are sitting on the Poison 4, so I don't think it's really in Arison's interest to operate ahead of the B&M. The B&M, if it operates, is going to be forced to buy a train because it has that guaranteed track connection. So Chuck is going to be in a position where he has to decide to shuffle trains from the NYC, or he buys the Poison 4 and the 5. So if Arison operates the Erie after the B&M, there's at least a decent chance that he gets both 5 trains, which is pretty strong. So operating order here is very important. And Physics Squirrel has a ton of liquidity, so he's going to be able to have a outside say in when companies operate because he can just sell companies down. Everyone's ledged here, so the key number here is going to be 67. You're going to have to sell a company down 5 slots in order to have them operate after the company's here. B&M, it's possible to do that because it's already been trashed twice. So pretty easy to get it down another 3 times. The Erie, if Arison buys up to 60%, is actually safe from being trashed down 5 times because there's only 4 shares that would be available to do it, unless 2 players collude. I should make that caveat. But I think that Arison does want to operate after the B&M if possible. So we'll see. It's important to pay attention to operating order here as the 5s are about to break. Physics Squirrel. He is going to buy the B&M again. So I think we're going to see him buy up 3 shares here and put it down to 67 so that Erie operates first, potentially breaks into 5s, and then Physics Squirrel on the CNO has the opportunity to buy a 5. CNO does not have enough cash to really ensure that he does that. So I guess that's the only problem for that strategy. But if you look at the other players, neither do the B&O and the NYC, and they're both train locked too if the 5 trains come out. Chuck could potentially make that change by shuffling trains, but if he's operating later, then he doesn't have that opportunity. So the CNO may actually end up shuffling a train into the NY&H, or shuffling a train out, so the NY&H can end up with a 5 instead. Okay. So I think the crucial thing here is that the B&M doesn't get to buy 2 5 trains. And I don't think there's a way that Physics Squirrel can avoid that even by trashing the B&M. Because he's not going to have the NY&H operate ahead of the B&M in any scenario. He does buy another market share. Arison has floated the Erie. Physics Squirrel buys the 3rd share of the B&M and trashes it, so now it is operating later. But again, I don't see a way for him to get a 5 train in the CNO. So I'm not sure that this is going to end up changing much. He does still have a ton of cash, though. Everybody is passing, it looks like. And Physics Squirrel is going to trash the Erie a little bit, too. Just twice there. Doesn't change operating order. Physics Squirrel buying paying shares, just gonna load up on these B&O shares now that he has done his dirty work. And I think I was neglecting to remember that he had just stolen the B&O. So by shuffling trains between the CNO and the B&O, he's going to be able to bring out a 5 train in one of those companies. So that makes perfect sense to trash the B&M. I was forgetting that he had 3 companies, not just 2. Okay. So the strategy checks out. He's continuing to buy the B&O, anticipating probably having a 5 train there, up to 60% of it, and is now going to reserve the presidency of the CPR. CPR suitcase has already been broken. I don't know that he necessarily cares to float that right now, but he's going to deny that to the other players as an option, and I believe now is in control of 4 presidencies. So he's got a ton of train liability with a bunch of 3 trains, not enough money for enough permanent trains, but he has a safety valve in the $1,000 of the CPR in theory. And, he owns half the companies in the game. So his control of the game state is just totally outsized compared to the other players. Um, he's going to be able to dictate when trains come out. He's going to be able to cut up the map and protect his runs and cut other people's runs. This is just a very commanding position. He does have to make sure he doesn't bankrupt. That is the key downside of all these presidencies. But is with the extra control that he now has of the train rush, um, I think that he probably doesn't have much fear about that. I mean, just think about it in terms of train availability. You have two players with two slots for trains. So 4 and a 5, 5, 5, potentially. I'm not saying that that's what's going to happen, but that's potentially what could happen. Then everybody's train locked. Rock has availability for a train, but he is far, far away from buying a 6 train. So Physics Scroll is going to be able to shuffle trains to his heart delight. He's going to be able to stall the game out and just run all these shares that he's accumulated, which is a very good position for him to be in. All right, let's stop talking about it and see it happen. Everybody passes, and we're into the operating round. This is operating round 4, so it's been a very fast game. Erie is going to immediately token Rochester. I think you probably have to do that there. The NYC could really cripple you for the rest of the game with a token there. Does have the cash for it. And we will see the 4 and the 5 come out. So Physics Scroll master plan here is working. He's been able to insert his companies in between the two newly floated companies so that he's able to grab a cheap 5 train. Upgrades Pittsburgh, runs it, and is going to shuffle the train out of the B&O to make train space for the B&O. B&O is able to secure the Philadelphia upgrade into New York. Is out of tokens, so I believe the PRR could token there and cut that run. He's going to be a little bit short of cash, but that is a liability for him in the future. We'll see what happens with Reading and Allentown, whether or not there's a run into New York from that axis or not. B&O runs for 140, pays it, and buys the 5. 2 of the 5s are now consumed. NYC upgrades New York, runs both of his trains, pretty darn good revenue, and is going to withhold it, probably in anticipation of shuffling trains and then bringing out a 6 in 4.2. The B&M does not have enough cash to buy a 5 and a 6, but with this withhold on the NYC and a train shuffle into the B&M, we'll see that 6 come out without any difficulty. The one thing that I'll note about this action in the NYC is that he didn't help out the B&M with an upgrade here. He was a little bit greedy and upgraded New York instead. Maybe should have prioritized upgrade in this track so that the B&M was guaranteed to get into New York. May see Physics Scroll and the NYNH block him out here. We'll see. Upgrades Providence and buys the 5 and then shuffles the train out of the NYC. No surprises there. So I think Chuck has secured himself 2 permanent trains without doubt. PRR upgrades Baltimore, runs for 220 and withholds it. This is why I'm not a huge fan of getting up to 10 shares in your company. You're having to withhold. Unlikely that you're going to get a 6. You're probably going to still have to out of pocket a D train. Your runs are not that great, and you've not bought other shares from other players. NYNH is upgrading Albany, so chooses not to block the B&M. I think that was maybe a missed opportunity. Don't want to give the B&M runs it doesn't otherwise deserve. Runs for 270 and withholds it. Erie, 2 trains, but pretty bad track, is running for just 130 and pays it. C&O gets into Baltimore, running for 250 and paying it. B&O getting a second run into Philadelphia for himself. Will have really good revenue until that 3 train rusts, which I think is going to happen pretty much right away. So 390, but I think that's kind of the high point for the B&O's runs. NYC, $800 in this company. A ton of money. Maybe he forgot, or maybe he was expecting that the 6 train would have come out and he was hoping for a quick D train upgrade. I think if that had happened, that would have been real bad news for Physics World, because by definition, a 6 train would have had to come out, and now he needs to also somehow find a D train. So that would have been very dangerous for Physics World, but there's no 6 trains that have been bought, so someone defied expectations for Chuck Hanna, I think. But we should be seeing a 6 train at least. He does get he actually blocks himself on the B&M. Interesting. There's a valid upgrade that will still get the B&M into New York. We'll see. I guess he's guaranteed to get that if he wants it since he's operating next. Um, okay, let's see what happens. Pays out 150 and the 6 comes out. B&M gets the upgrade he was looking for. Doesn't have money for a token, but has the correct train to run that track and runs for 150 PRR. Upgrades the Lancaster and is going to run for 230. Has to withhold again. And NYNH trainless, but with plenty of cash for the 6 if he wants it. And is going to have to buy that unless he doesn't have the money for the upgrade, even if you were to shuffle a 4 over. So should see the last 6 come out here. Great. Let's look at the game state before we get into the stock round. Physics Squirrel, far and away the most cash. So even though he has a ton of train liability, didn't have to heavily withhold to cover most of his train liability, actually. He is sitting on a 4, a 6, and a 5. So needs a train for the C&O, but has the CPR to bring out a D train if he wants it. CPR needs its own train, so he does have some risk here. We'll see if that CPR actually ends up floating or not. He could just sit on 20% and let somebody else take it from him. I think he's been playing too aggressively to really expect that outcome, but we'll see. Great map control, pretty good runs for all of his companies, so still in the leader position. Rock, PRR, we've commented on this before, rightfully in last place. B&M and the NYC, decent runs for both of these companies, and will be pretty secure for the rest of the game in those runs. So some potential for that player, but he's trailing in 6 shares behind Physics Squirrel, and his net worth is pretty far behind. So he's got a ways to go. Needs to hope that Physics Squirrel runs into some kind of complication here, either a dump or an unexpected rust that he's not prepared for. Otherwise, I think that Physics Squirrel's lead is just going to continue to expand. Arison, sole presidency is the Erie. I don't think that's going to be enough. So I would say that Physics Squirrel is in a very commanding position at this point. Stock round, Arison's going to buy an NYC. Chuck is also going for the NYC. That company's sold out. Rock is buying the CPR. Okay. I guess he's just going to do some trashing here, but that's not going to change the game state. And really, Rock needs to be worried about himself, not about trashing the leader. He needs to just buy high value shares here. He still has train liability in the PRR. He's only halfway to a D train. He needs shares that are going to pay. So he does immediately trash it. Nobody, I think, is going to be caring too much about that. If the CPR gets trashed enough, I suppose it operates behind these companies with 4 trains, which really just benefits Physics Squirrel, right? He gets another run of the 4. Would have to be trashed twice more. That's very conceivable to see happen. We'll see. Rock is done with his actions. Physics Squirrel going to buy Ping shares, really in no rush to float the CPR. And sorry, he's selling the C&O and then buying the Erie. Okay, I get mixed up sometimes. Arison also going to be trashing the CPR, it looks like. So this 4 train on the Erie is in theory secure, although the Erie could be counter trashed. I don't know if it's really worth doing that. Physics Squirrel probably just wants to buy shares and build up his share lead. Chuck Hanna is buying the Erie. Rock is also buying, actually, sorry, he is buying the B&M. Okay, hopefully just going to sit on that share. Physics Squirrel snagging cheap B&M shares. Arison also B&M. Chuck is out of cash. Rock out of cash. Physics Squirrel CPR, so he's going to go back and float that, it looks like. And it looks like Chuck is still trashing. We'll take a C&O. Physics Squirrel buying the cheap shares that have been sold. He knows he has enough cash to float the CPR, and he's just going to continue to build up a share lead. This is the downside of taking stock actions to trash companies, is that the other players can just buy these cheap shares and then run away with this in terms of share density. Physics Squirrel is going to go down to a naked presidency on the C&O. I guess facing D's, you're probably not worried about someone stealing that presidency. I don't think he actually wants to lose the presidency. He'd probably be okay with it if it happened, but I don't think that's the goal here. He's just looking to fill up his market for paying shares and buy other people's shares to deny them those shares in the later game. He's going to buy. Okay. Arison passing, Chuck passing, Rock passing, Physical Squirrel still floating, and the CPR is now floated. Physical Squirrel still has another share he can buy if he wants it. Buys the Erie, and I think we will be into the operating round. So stock lead at this point is 7. Yeah. CPR is going to be forced to buy a train, but doesn't have to buy the D. Could shuffle between these two companies to just get enough cash to eventually bring out the D. We'll see. They want to just bring it out, though, to deny the upgrade to these other players, specifically Rock. If Rock bankrupts here, we haven't really talked about bankruptcy, but if Rock bankrupts here, Physical Squirrel should pretty easily win. He's got so many shares. He's operating late enough in priority that all these companies are going to operate besides the NYNH. I don't think the 4 and the 6 train are going to be enough revenue for Chuck to catch up. He's $500 behind. So I think that's the move for Physical Squirrel. Just push trains and shuffle until Rock bankrupts. Now, Rock has almost enough money to buy the D train. Falling back is going to deny him $100 of net worth because it's $10 per share. So if this rusts, his value, his liquidity and value are going to be $100 less. So he's right on the cusp right now. If people pay out, he would be able to afford it. But I think if he falls back, he still bankrupts. This is something that you could easily master mode and figure out. You don't have to just play by your gut. But Physical Squirrel is going to buy the D, or buy the 4 and then upgrade for the D. So I think he is hoping for a bankruptcy win here. Going to just shuffle the train, I'm sure, in the C&O. Only has 2% or 20% of that. Doesn't really care that it doesn't run. And the B&O has a pretty good run, pays it out. Should be seeing everyone pay out here because we're worried about a bankruptcy. Runs for 150. NYC links up with his other company, pretty good revenue. B&M gonna just maximize his revenue. 180, and this is the moment of truth. Does Rock have the liquidity here to actually buy a train? In theory, he has like $13 extra, but I think when he falls back, he's bankrupt. So Physical Squirrel is going to take this on a pretty narrow bankruptcy, it looks like. Yeah. Okay. Not a narrow win. It's just that Rock almost didn't bankrupt. But he does, and Physical Squirrel wins. Now, I think that it's fair to say that if Rock did not bankrupt here, Physical Squirrel probably still would have won. He did have to find a second D train for himself, but you can shuffle pretty comfortably between the CPR and the C&O for a while and just pay out with your other two companies and then afford it down the road. And you have such a share lead that as long as you don't sell any shares, really, the other players aren't going to be able to buy enough shares to overcome your lead. So even if you have to out of pocket $1,000 down the road, you're going to be far enough ahead that you can still win. So I don't think this bankruptcy determined Physical Squirrel win. I think it just accelerated it. Well played to Physical Squirrel. He was favored going into the match, so no surprises there. I do think that the B&O dump in particular was ill-advised from Arison. I understand the NYNH dump. Sometimes you just play against a player that's playing aggressively and they take your presidency. But I think the B&O dump in particular was ill-advised and probably a key contributor to Physical Squirrel dominating win here. Chuck Hanna, pretty good synergy between the NYC and the B&M. No major flaws that jump to mind there. And then Rock's Optimus, we talked about his PRR investment, but I think that's probably not enough to really change the outcome in the game. So dominating performance from Physical Squirrel, well played. We'll be looking forward to seeing him in the second phase of the tournament. Thanks for watching.